This is episode 54, Strategic Leadership with Claire Chandler.
Can you remember a time you failed? A time you were so close to your goal, but it all came crashing down? We've all been there. But why does this happen? Why do we sometimes fail when we attempt to scale? Here's the secret. In order to grow your business and expand your mind, you need a controlled environment, like a plant growing in a greenhouse. It's my mission to help experts and entrepreneurs grow rapidly by leveraging outside resources and unlocking universal wisdom. But the question is, how will they do it? Join me on this epic journey as we monetize our passions, scale our businesses, and master eternal abundance. My name is Aaron Civitarese, and this is the Growth Podcast.
All right. Good afternoon. This is the Growth Podcast. My name is Aaron Civitarese, and I'm here today with my guest, Claire Chandler. Claire is a business growth and strategic leadership advisor, and I'm extremely excited to have her on here. Claire, welcome to the Growth Podcast.
Thanks. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Claire, we're getting to know each other a little bit. Tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit of context. Who's Claire? What a little bit of background, please.
Yeah, sure. It's kind of a loaded question, right? So I'll
absolutely.
Yeah. So I live in New Jersey. I was born and raised here. I actually live right on the coastline now, which is a great place to be. And I spent the bulk of my career to date in corporate America, and finally kind of broke free from that in 2011 and went on my own. And formed my company 2 years later, Talent Boost. And so sort of evolved and grew and scaled and, did all of the things that you and I kind of talked about a little bit offline. And then sort of got to where I am now, which is a primary focus on helping leaders who are at that growth point, that scale point, whether it's to add their first teammate or to add a division or, branch out into a different location and really help them to scale without the growing pains, which they, inevitably kind of come across at any of those growth points.
Yeah, absolutely. Growing pains. Ain't that the truth? So you were in corporate America. What were you doing then?
Ooh, yeah, I was. I consider myself a parolee. So I work with corporate clients all the time, and I say, listen, I've been on your side of the table, and I know your pain, but I broke out, and I know the way to the toward the light. So I started out. I was an English major in college, and I didn't really have a defined sort of career plan, and so I started out mostly in communications roles. Various from, being an editor to, and not like a sexy glamorous editor, like an editor of environmental impact statements. So like real page turners, right? And then I, sort of grew from there, got into more of the glossy side of communications and public outreach. And then I did a stint in customer relations for our customer service department of a utility company. And then kind of snuck in the back door or the side door of our human resources department. One day they called me up and they said, hey, our head of training and development just left, just gave notice. Would you be interested in kind of, joining us in that role? And that really kind of tapped into my passion, for sort of training and teaching and facilitating breakthroughs, for employees at all levels, right from the frontline union worker all the way through to the C-suite. So it was an interesting journey that kind of led me to where I am, and I wouldn't have traded my time in corporate. Really, it was a very good experience with a lot of learning along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I second that. Actually, my wife and I both were in corporate Asia in Singapore, and it gave us the foundation to go off and do our consulting after that for the next half a decade or so. It gave us the foundation. It gave us the structure, the SOPs, understanding what type of goals are realistic and how to get there.
Right.
Corporate culture, it puts you in a box, but the box has been very well thought out. so you can pull a lot of great information and experience from that, right? That's how I felt.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, starting my career in that corporate box, and I think it's a great description, gave me some structure and some, best practices that, now that I have ventured out on my own, 9 years ago now, I think had I tried to do the opposite or just, right out of college, try to be entrepreneurial, I don't think I would be successful. I think, and never say never, and who knows, right? But to your point, I think the corporate experience does give you that structure, does give you that perspective that when you do then branch out on your own, you can lean on that, you can draw from that, and you can get people to, sort of break out of that box, which is often, the reason they're going through growing pains.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a good point. When people are trying to break out of the box or they're going through growing pains, or even someone like yourself or myself who left that structure and went off and became an entrepreneur, someone who's listening right now, possibly they're in corporate America, or possibly they're in college and they're about to enter corporate America, or possibly they're, in a long career and they're not enjoying it, or maybe they are enjoying it, but they see something else they want to experiment. What would you tell someone who is in the box? They're understanding they're in a box. They would love to try something else, but they have a lot of fear around the uncertainty of going out on their own. What would you tell that person?
It's a great question. And especially this year, right? In the midst of COVID and all of the uncertainty and anxiety, layered on top of any uncertainty and anxiety you may have already felt. For me, and like you just said, we kind of share this perspective that the corporate experience is valuable for, if you look at it from the right perspective, and if you were open to learning, there are leaders in any corporate climate, whether it is an amazing Fortune 50 company that has been voted one of the best places to work for, to the unfortunately more toxic workplace cultures. There's always something to learn, even if it's what not to do going forward, right? But there are always leaders, in those environments that you can learn from, and you can sort of invite to informally mentor you. And I say leader kind of loosely in that context, because they don't have to be in a leadership role per se, but they just have something, right? That you want to either emulate, learn from, evolve, and put your own signature on it. So I would say to those people that are sort of feeling like they are in a box or afraid to go into a role where they're going to be boxed in, as hokey as the analogy might sound, take the box and stand on top of it. And what I mean by that is, you used the word foundation before, when you talk about your corporate career. And that's exactly how you should look at your corporate role, the role that you are in now, any role that you are considering going into if you're fresh out of college. What can you draw from and stand upon to give you the perspective, the insight, and sort of the input and even the impetus to look toward what's next. The reality is there's always going to be uncertainty in taking that step off of that box, that ledge, that current role that you're in. There's a saying, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. There's always going to be uncertainty, right? If you step off that box, you step out of that role, and you try something new. And again, especially in this climate that we're in, right now. But the worst thing that you can do is not take your shot, because time goes so fast. And that was the position that I was in 9 years ago, where I didn't have everything buttoned up and figured out, mapped out, a business plan for how I was going to make it as a consultant. I just knew that if I waited any longer, I was going to blink, and it was going to be 10 years down the road, and I was going to regret not taking my shot then. So there's always going to be uncertainty and doubt, and, there's voices in your head, and you have to just sort of say, I've got to take my shot sometime. Let's, what's the worst thing that can happen if I do it right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. There's a lot to be said, especially with what's going on with the world right now. We're recording this during this coronavirus stuff. It's early 2020. And, I almost feel like having a job or working for a company and just relying on that as your source of income, to me, gives me more anxiety than going out, building businesses, consulting for multiple companies, building multiple revenue income streams. I feel like that gives me more anxiety, relying on a company's paycheck, than going out and building it for myself. What do you think about that?
I could not agree more. My stomach was clenching when you started that, because I thought you were going to say, oh, I kind of, wish I had that sort of steady paycheck. And a lot of people that listen to that and are in a corporate role are probably thinking the exact opposite. And that's okay, because, the entrepreneur life is not for everybody. I can't tell you the number of people when I, gave notice from my cushy corporate job, right? And I was on an executive track, and, it was a stable company, and, all that great stuff. I can't tell you the number of people who would pull me aside and say, we care about you. Are you sure you know what you're doing? And I said, actually, no, I'm not sure at all. And that's kind of the fun part, right? And it is interesting, because especially given the climate that we're in right now, your steady paycheck is not as steady as it used to be. And businesses are struggling with how to keep the lights on, how to continue forward, how to stay competitive, how to grow in ways that they've never had to tackle before, and in ways that they are not being fully transparent about, for good reason, right? They don't want to express that anxiety and that uncertainty too transparently. But the reality is, no one has ever been here before. So if you're a business owner, you're a leader, you're a leader of people, you're thinking of growing, you just started your business and you had the misfortune of starting in February, and then March hit, and, all this shutdown occurred. I agree with you. I would rather have, the control. And my theory is all of us entrepreneurs are control freaks, but that's a conversation for another time. But, I would rather have control over my own destiny, and the ability to, if certain areas of my business dry up, close down, have to shutter for a while or permanently, that I've got other avenues open. Yeah. We live in a very fortunate time, COVID aside, because the gig economy is, continuing to rise. And I think even before the pandemic, companies were really starting to grasp the value of going out there in the marketplace and buying or leasing expertise, rather than just relying on those traditional models of, we're going to staff up. And that's scary for a lot of corporate cultures. They're not used to that sort of, flexibility and, again, uncertainty. But it's an exciting time to be doing the types of things that we are doing, building businesses and scaling and growing and all of that, because there is so much more flexibility and receptivity in the market to that sort of adaptive kind of a service that we provide.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So when you were transitioning from corporate to the entrepreneur space, you were stepping out on your own. I'm sure you had a lot of resistance internally, and I'm sure you also had some resistance externally, maybe some people around you, family, friends, coworkers, kind of looking at you like, are you sure about this kind of thing? And then in your mind being like, am I sure about this? You know what I mean? So when you're going through that, everybody feels these feelings. We feel the resistance. We feel an oscillation start to happen, 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, this type of stuff. When you were going through this transition, can you recall any struggles that stood out? And if so, how did you overcome them?
It's a great question. So I'll tell you the short version of kind of what propelled me that year. Why was 2011 the year that I left the cushy corporate bubble? It was spring of that year, and I was going 150 miles an hour. I was being groomed for an executive position. I was a VP at the time, and I was traveling like crazy and going, 150 miles an hour. And I had a great team but it was just, it was a lot of kind of chaos in my personal life, just because I was always on the go, right? The ground under my feet was never quite stable. And I got a cancer diagnosis. Got diagnosed with cancer. And so I'll skip to the end. I'm totally cancer-free now. So that's not, what this story is about, but what it, that's thumbs up, right? But what that did for me was, it forced me to go from 150 miles an hour to zero, take a month off of work, have surgery, have some follow-up treatments, recover. And that was really my wake-up call. And, to sort of go through that, life is too short. Is this really the path I want to be on? It was the kind of voice in my head that I had been able to silence because I was so busy. And so when you're kind of forced to stop and reckon with you're not going to live forever and life is, relatively short, it shifts your focus on how you make decisions about your future. Because for me, it became very easy to say, this is going to be, when I take my shot. And the worst thing that's going to happen is I go out on my own, I fall flat on my face, and then I just go back and look for another job. The economy was in a different place than it is, in 2020. But, and there were, like I said, there were people at work that kept saying, do you really know what you're doing? Is this the right time? This is a stable company. Are you even sure about, the direction you want to go? Some family questioned it too. But I found, and I'm sure people listening to this will find the same thing, that the biggest enemy is inside your own head, and it's formed around two words. And those two words are, if only. And you will sit there, even though I had gotten cancer, even though I was sitting at home and sort of, reconciling my mind with the fact that I was not really on the path that I wanted to be on, there was still that sort of, to your point, wouldn't it be better to just kind of ride this year out and, continue in the corporate bubble and continue to have a steady income, et cetera. And there were all these if only voices, right? If only I had more experience, if only the economy were a little bit more stable. I had a backlog of clients lined up that were ready for the types of services I'm going to deliver, right? If only I didn't still have a couple more cancer treatments ahead of me this year. If only, if only, if only. And I kind of got to the point where I was like, you know what? F the if. Like, seriously. And for everybody, those if only phrases are different, but they come up against that same invisible barrier of holding you back from really trying something new. Because if you're not playing full out, if you're not truly doing what you're passionate about, what's in your genius zone, what lights you up, what makes you happy, what makes an impact, what are you waiting for? So that was really kind of the rebuttal to the voices that were loudest inside my own head.
Yeah, I love it. So true. So if only, what pops to me as soon as you say that, that's your subconscious mind trying to keep you safe, right? It's trying to stop you from taking what it believes to be as perceived risk. I'm going to go for a run and get fit today. If only it wasn't raining, but that's your mind telling you, don't go for a run. You might die out there. It's way safer here on the couch.
Right.
If only it wasn't raining. That it's bringing excuses into your world. If only I didn't have this. If only I had this. If only, if only, if only. Yeah. That's a really
and disguised as a survival instinct.
Disguised as exactly.
Subconscious. It's so true.
Exactly.
It's so true.
Yeah, and it plays all day long, nonstop. That's why the humans evolved and lived so long, right? It's literally because of this survival tactic. But nowadays, if you using the run analogy, for example, you're not going to get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger out there, right? But your mind, it doesn't realize that that's not there anymore because it's been thousands of years. You know what I mean? So It's the same with stepping out of corporate and going out on your own and stuff. All of a sudden it's like, whoa, we got bills to pay. We have mortgages. We have this, we have that. If you go out there, you might not be able to pay it. Stay here, stay safe. Yeah. Right. And then it starts coming up with these excuses why you shouldn't do it. And here's the justification. Yeah. And it's like the famous saying, growth only happens outside of your comfort zone. Well, this is it, right? You got out of your comfort zone in corporate and you went out on your own, got uncomfortable and grew.
That's right? Exactly right.
Yeah, I love it. So what was the click, like the light bulb moment that, spurred the gasoline for your fire to actually go out and do it? What were you trying to achieve as a consultant and as an entrepreneur? What was your big why? Was it the corporate, or was it you're trying to accomplish something XYZ? What was it for you?
Oh, that's a great question. And I would love to sit here and say that it was crystal clear for me when I made the leap. I think the biggest driver for me was at the time that because I was kind of forced into this period of silence and recovery and reflection, and the first 3 weeks of my 4 weeks out of work, I didn't even look at email, which was completely unheard of for me. So, I truly shut out the world and just got reconnected with my core, if that makes any sense. And I knew what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to go down the track that I was down. And I didn't have a completely solid form around, what I did want to do. But I knew there were certain components, like working with people to help them grow, working with leaders to help them be more effective, working with employees to, find and really contribute to the career path and the role that they wanted, right? So there was all this stuff around, I think just kind of saying it now, there was all this stuff around finding more fulfillment in my own life by helping other people become a fuller, better version of themselves. Right? That was, I think, my initial impetus, and I didn't have the first clue how I was going to do that. I got back to work. I had a long conversation with my employer, and I said, "This is what I want to do." And they were extremely supportive. I had been there for close to 15 years, and so we kind of negotiated this long transition period. So I didn't leave until the fall, and I remember clearly, that Friday, I left, and, tearful goodbyes to people that I had grown to, really love and respect over the years. And the following Monday, I woke up and smile on my face before my eyes were even open. I'm like, this is the first day of my new adventure.
Yeah.
And I didn't have the first clue what to do, right? It was okay, I treated myself to a new laptop, woohoo, treated myself to a new phone because I had to hand all that in, right, when I left. And it was put on a big old pot of coffee and the sun is shining and the birds are singing and I'm going, okay, so now I have to go out and get clients. I've just turned into a hunter-gatherer. I don't know how to do that. I laugh at myself now, kind of looking back at how naively optimistic I was. But, you just sort of put one foot in front of the other and you just make forward steps, even if they're small, and just, start reintroducing yourself to the world as not attached to this corporate behemoth behind you, but as Claire, and, kind of leading with that. And, eventually that opened doors and it led to some really amazing, fulfilling work.
I love it. So good. Such good. So good. It's so true. That sums it up right there. That really does. Two things you touched on there that are super deep. It can go deep on this stuff. Two things that popped out for me there. One, naive optimism, right?
Naive optimism.
Yeah, naive optimism. This is something that's common in extremely successful people. I'm talking extremely, like Elon Musk and, Richard Branson, these types of people. If you read...
Elon's my boy. You just touched upon. I love that guy.
Me too. I love him. He's amazing. So, I've read a lot of these guys' biographies and things. I'm sure you probably have as well. And, a lot of the times what they talk about is focusing on what you're trying to create. What do you want to do? What am I going to do? Not how am I going to do it? If you start thinking how, you start getting analysis paralysis. You start getting overwhelmed. You start getting fearful and you pull back, you oscillate again. But if you're just looking at the long term, what am I going to create here? What am I creating? One of my mentors always talks to me about creation. He's like, just focus on what you want to create. Just focus on the end result. So your end result was, you want to be on your own. You want to be consulting, impacting the world, having fulfillment. How? I don't know, but that's what I'm going to be doing. Right. And if you can just think like that, if you can just tell yourself, that's what I'm going to do. I don't know how it's going to happen, but if I'm in the vibration of that is my end result, I'm surrounding myself with people who either have that already, or they're on that path, or they know somebody who's been there, and you can learn from them and network with those people. If you just remain consistent and disciplined over time, you have no other destination but to be there. Right? Would you agree with me on that?
Love that. I love just that you pulled that out of what I said, which I didn't even, I didn't see it that way. And I can't agree with you more. Like just that if you dwell too much on the how, or you tell yourself, I've got to have that part nailed before I take that step, you're right. You won't do it, because it's never going to be perfect. And you get so caught up in process rather than the journey, and just sort of pursuing your why, to use your word, in the how, you will kind of figure out. I love, and I think a lot of people listening to this, that's where they get stuck, right? Well, how am I going to get there? How is that going to work? How am I going to fund that? How am I going to afford that? It's another, spin on the if only. It's like, well, if only I had all that figured out. Don't wait for that, because people would be shocked at how fast time goes. Yeah. And you could have been learning and growing and failing and learning from that, and, building stronger.
Exactly. Yeah. Fail forward as quickly as possible. Right. It's just
Absolutely.
that simple. And the if only and the how. If only I knew how.
Right.
That's the ultimate sentence right there. If only I knew how. Is. Right. If only I knew.
That applies to everybody. That is like the generic application of the if only. If only I knew how.
Yeah, if only I knew how. And the answer to that is, guess what? None of us know how. We just are trying to figure it out, and we're getting around people who kind of know how, because they have that result, or they're working towards that result. And you just simply get in their space, pay for their mentorship, pay for their coach, read their book, go to their events, learn from these people, surround yourself with people who have what you want, right? Very cool. Okay. So let's take a step forward now into your current reality. Walk us through how you set up your current business, the steps you went through. How did that all look?
So 9 years ago, like I said, I took the leap, didn't really have a plan, hadn't formed my company yet. That would come 2 years later. But through all of that original, I spent, I would say, those first 2 years kind of, like I said, reintroducing myself to the world as Claire, right? Not as Claire, VP of Human Resources for this company. And it was more difficult for me to come to terms with what that meant than it did or would have for any prospect I was talking to, right? And I know you can let us go real deep on that, just because it's got to start with your mindset. If you're confident about what you offer the world, people will follow you, right? People will get on board with that. And so, the early days, there was a lot of, what I call fraud complex, what is more commonly known as imposter syndrome, right? Mm-hmm. I would walk into a meeting with a client or with a new prospect. And literally the voice in my head as I'm walking from the car to the front door is today the day they're going to figure out that I'm making up this stuff as I go, right? And I think we all have been there. And I think we all continue to sort of be there. And it's like, how do you reshape that voice and say, this is the day they're going to get to a breakthrough, and I'm going to, be part of the guide that gets them there. So those first years were, I loved your message about always be creating. That's the space that I love to be in as well. And those early years were sort of creating my niche, because I didn't know what it was going to be. And so over those first couple of years, it became somewhat accidentally that I became an advisor to smaller businesses that didn't have, their own human resources team, but they needed, they were at a point in their growth where they were either a startup company that was starting to add staff. They were, a family-run company that had to stop acting like, they're a bunch of kids running dad's company, right? They're a one-state company that's going to expand into the next state, and they needed some guidance on how to do that. And so what was great about that was the size of the companies that I was initially helping gave me direct access to the founder, the owner, the partners, the CEO. And so, you didn't have those walls, you didn't have that bureaucracy, but I had that perspective of having been in a large corporate environment where there was more structure, where there were more SOPs and processes that were tried and true and battle tested and worked. So I was able to bring that perspective to people who said, I don't fit in a corporate mold. I went out on my own and I built this company and I've added a team and I've added, service lines and this and that. But now I'm on the verge of chaos because I went from creating something out of my own head to now I've got to bring people along with me who don't necessarily get it because I can't articulate it, right? And so over those years, it really kind of morphed into, I'm sort of that leadership whisperer, right? I'm kind of the voice in the CEO's head to say, let's figure out where you want to focus your energy. Because I think that's the other thing that business owners and leaders kind of trip over their own feet about, right? That as they grow, they still think they've got to do everything themselves, that they have to be, the expert in all things. And I've worked with CEOs who are amazing visionaries and values, based leaders and strategists and big picture thinkers and all of this, but don't have the first clue how to actually run the business. They are two very, very different disciplines, right? And so working, with those people. So it really has evolved and morphed and grown into that's my specialty, that I work with, those C-suite leaders or owners or founders, who are kind of at that point, who say, this isn't the thought I had about what I wanted my business to be got more complicated because I added complexity, right? I added teammates. I added, a new discipline. I added a new division. We took over another company, or we got bought out by a company. And I know that, and I'm speaking as the CEO or the founder, I know that I've got to change something about how I run this company, how I lead the company, how I grow the company, but I just don't know what that is. Mm-hmm. And so, that's kind of really how I've gotten to this point. And some of the how, it's interesting. It's easier to see the how in hindsight, right? It's not so easy when you're climbing the mountain. When you look back and you go, wow, we're up really high, right? It's really been about kind of coming in and meeting those leaders where they are and helping them put out that most immediate fire, which is different for everybody. And then sort of saying, okay, that sort of opened up some additional possibilities for you. And yes, additional challenges, but you're not alone in that journey, and sort of focusing in on those conversations where they have a sounding board. They've got someone with, the bigger corporate perspective, the people strategy perspective, all of these other lenses that they can sort of lay out their frustrations or their challenges or their dreams to somebody who gets it and can kind of pull them forward so that they're not venting that out to the employees they're trying to inspire. So it's been interesting. I mean, it's just that, the journey for me, it's never been about, what does the end destination look like for me? It's just been the journey. And as you say, like just, growing and stretching and getting to the point where you're comfortable delivering what you deliver, but then kind of looking for what's next and stretching again and becoming uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So key.
So key. Keep climbing the mountain, and when you get to the top, there's another mountain there.
It's one in a range of mountains. That's right.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I love it. It's so true. Hey, so speaking of scaling and growing, you're all about scaling businesses. We're all about the Growth Podcast. So this is perfect. Yeah. How does one scale a business without losing the founder's personality? The intimate culture that a company has. How do you scale and retain that? Because I'm sure that's a huge problem.
It is an enormous problem, and it is so crucial to the sustainability of a company. Because Marshall Goldsmith, I'm sure has often said, and he wrote a book about it, what got you here isn't going to get you there, right? And that's more about the how, right? That's more about the, how are we going to, deliver what we do? How are we going to deliver our why in ways that are more efficient, more effective, that we can scale up and do that with, to a broader population of prospective clients and customers, without having to grow exponentially, our workforce or our expenses. And it's a key point, because that is normally, if a company is not paying attention, it's the first thing that they lose, is that sort of the essence of what was so exciting and so unique and so game changing about, their entry into the marketplace, so to speak, right? And founders, I'll just sort of zero in on founders for a second. Founders do die off. And, the major key, if I boil it down to one word that people have to get right before they do anything else, is clarity.
Oh, yeah.
And what I mean by that is, the founders often have a very clear picture in their own heads of what they want their business to be. It's the reason that they founded it, right? It's the reason they brought on that first employee, that first client. They knew what they wanted to be, who they wanted to be, why they were going to, be different. And, back to your point, the how evolves. The clearer that founder can articulate and infect the rest of the company with that why. And yes, part of it is values, but it's really mission. It's really, regardless of how big we get, how, far into the geography we grow, how complex we become as an organization, we are always going to be about X, Y, and Z, right? And yes, values kind of keep you from veering off the path. But if you just say, we're always going to be about integrity and this and that and the other, those sort of just become platitudes that get pasted on a wall, and they sort of like gum, they sort of lose their flavor, right? But if you're really, really crystal clear, that this is what the founder believed, this is why he built the business, and this is what this is all going to be about. It's a formula for success. So clarity is definitely the key. I was mentioning some of these CEOs that I've worked with they're very visionary, they're very strategic, they think very high level, but they're not so good at the running of the business. The ones in that category that have failed are the ones who cannot articulate clearly that vision that they think is so clear in their head. And it sounds so basic, but it is a fundamental skill that not every CEO has, to really sort of get out of their head. All right, so I'm going to go Harry Potter on you. So if you read the Harry Potter books or you saw the movies, and I think it's Dumbledore who's got that thing where he can take some ideas, like sift them out of his head like smoke, and he puts them in like a cauldron or something.
Cool.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, right? But I've talked to some CEOs and I've said, what's your vision for the future? Or what's the mission of this company? I get a different answer every time I ask that same person that same question. If you're not crystal clear on what you guys are all about and why you're in existence and why people should follow you, not only are you not going to sustain that business, it's not going to look the same, when you grow as when you started. So clarity for me, boiled down to kind of one word, it is absolutely the starting point. It's sort of the root, if you will, and everything kind of grows from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So true, actually. When I look back on the companies that I've worked with and the various leaders that I've worked beside or under, I can very clearly see the difference. When you articulate it this way, I can look back and I can think, oh yeah, well, that guy was very clear and his business is thriving. That guy was not very clear at all, actually, and they're kind of struggling. I can see it very clearly when you put it that way. When you have your touch point meetings, and if the CEO comes out and starts with, this is our mission, this is our vision, this is what we do, we impact, we do this, we do that, and they repeat it like a broken record every week, it's perfect, right? Because it's being reinforced why we're all here, and it keeps you on that path towards the end result, right? Rather than diverging and losing momentum and getting kind of confused and lost, right? Am I on the right path?
You're 100% on the right path. It's about the legacy, if you will. And I know, the modern CEO doesn't really think in terms of leaving a legacy, but when you're a founder, it's really important that, your company is an expression of you. Its personality, its culture stem from your personality, right? And the clearer you are up front, and the more clearly you can embed and sort of infuse, and I even said infect before, and it's true. The people that you add to your team, the longer that's going to live on. The more you use that as a barometer for, or a measuring stick for, this is what we're going to tolerate, this is what we're not. Even clients and customers that are the right fit are going to gravitate toward you, and the ones that are not the right fit are going to get repelled, and that's good, right? Because if they're not the right fit, they're going to be hell to live with, as we know. I have a client that has a long-standing history, and the founder is long deceased, but it's a huge company, and they literally have an office. His original office is there's a glass wall, like you can't get in there anymore. And it's like a museum to him. And it still has the hat that he always wore sitting on his desk. Whoa. And every CEO who came after him says, and they're very careful about who they hire to continue, to build and to grow and to sustain this company. And every CEO after him says, this is what our founder was about. This is what we will always be about. And this is how you can contribute to it. If you're able to say that in very, succinct terms, don't use big old vocabulary words. The simpler, the better. Everybody can attach meaning to that, from the frontline worker all the way up to the executive suite. If they can attach meaning between what they do and what they care about to how that's going to move the needle to help you continue to achieve your mission and get closer to your vision, you've got such a formula for success.
Absolutely. I love that. That's so cool. Hey, like a museum to the original founder.
It's like there's this reverence, and it's down a hall, and it gets like real quiet. It's just, you get chills like when you see it. I mean, I never met the guy, obviously, because he was long deceased, but it's just a cool sort of homage to him, right? Yeah. And they never ever forget that was the root of the company.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for an incoming CEO or incoming staff, for anybody, but especially the CEO, the leadership team, for them, they will have extreme clarity coming in, right? Extreme Absolutely. Clarity. And then they can just reflect that and pass that down. And obviously it's very impactful. I mean, it's so impactful that it's in your memory and you brought it up today, right? So it obviously impacted you very positively as well. So clearly it's a very cool thing. I would love to see more companies do that. I've never heard of that before, but I think that's very cool.
It's so, and it's magnetic, right? I mean, you said like it's a story that I even remember, and I have had chills like when I tell certain people that there are certain companies that just get it. Tony Hsieh, the CEO of Zappos, just gets it. If you ever read his biography or listen to him speak sometime, he just gets what his company is always going to be about. And he's very rigorous in how he hires and who he hires, that they get it too. And it's just, some CEOs would hear that story about the founder and he's got, his hat on the desk and it's a museum now, and think, well, when I'm a CEO, I want to, put my own stamp on things. You certainly can. There's still a latitude in a company like that, which granted is not for everybody, right? But there's still latitude for you to come in, move forward, upon that, that legacy and that history, and customize the how, right?
Exactly.
To just keep coming back, because it just resonated with me so much when you sort of brought that, into highlight. You can always customize the how, and your style is going to be different. Every leader's style is different. The worst thing they can do is look at leadership as a role that they play. You've got to be genuine to you, because employees are not stupid. They can smell a fake charismatic leader a mile away. The more genuine you are, the more authentic you are to your own style, and you own that, right? The better you're going to be, the more effective you're going to be, and the more willing your people are going to be to follow you.
Absolutely. I love it. I love it, Claire. So much wisdom here today. So much wisdom. It's awesome. I love it. Okay. So, for the listeners out there who would like to find you, I know you have an assessment that you help people through. I just want to say thanks for jumping on the Growth Podcast with me today. It's been a pleasure. I love chatting with you. You have a lot of wisdom. It's nice.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And so for the listeners who'd like to find you and take your assessment and things, where can they go?
Yeah, so the easiest place is to go to clairechandler.net. I'm sure you'll have the correct spelling in the show notes here. But yeah, there you can connect with me if you'd like to. You can learn more about my work. There are a bunch of free goodies on there. And I am literally about to launch a page on that site that is going to be exclusively for CEOs, founders, and owners to get together in sort of a forum or a community where they can kind of learn from each other and lean on each other. So look for that. I'm probably going to launch that later this week.
Well, that's awesome. Always moving forward down that path,
Absolutely.
climbing those mountains.
Doesn't matter the size of the step as long as it's in the right direction.
Oh, yes. We'll end it right there. Thank you so much for being on the Growth Podcast, Claire. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Aaron. I loved it.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. By the way, you know, there's some people who want to build an online business, but sometimes are scared of scams or who to trust, or they begin and they just get lost in the daily task with no blueprint to follow, right? And because of that, they never get started and just end up staying in the same position year after year because time flies, you know? So if you're thinking to yourself, there must be a way to create a predictable, stable income online, but you don't know where to start, I've got something you might enjoy. Head over to www.bjkugrowth.com. Watch a quick interview I had with my buddy. He's an 8-figure earner. His name is Bashar, and he gets into, you know, how he grew into a successful online entrepreneur and how he now is helping thousands of others do the same. You're gonna love it. You know, I've seen so many lives changed just learning this valuable information from him. So it might just be what you're looking for, you know? So go over to www.bjkugrowth.com. I'll see you there. And thanks again for tuning in and supporting the Growth Podcast.